Success comes from within, not from without. That's a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And then Jim Rohn wrote, success is not to be pursued, it is to be attracted by the person you become. Two great quotes. And I am so pleased to welcome today to our Finding Your Feet After a Failure Challenge. I'm so grateful and pleased to welcome Jenna. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, Lois. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled that you are here. So let me just give you a little bit about who Jenna is. Jenna Evelyn is a final year psychology student who is diagnosed with ADHD at 21 after being misdiagnosed and constantly struggling with suicidal ideations before she even left school. Probed and inspired by her own studies in psychology, she uses her story to educate others on the implications and benefits of neurodiversity to create a more empathetic, inclusive, and understanding environment in the workplace, schools, and in society for neurodivergence. Jenna Evelyn believes neurodivergence can be harnessed to bring immense value to companies and schools due to the incredible strengths it offers. Wow, that's quite a bit. Let's start. What is neurodivergence?
So, okay, I love to explain it this way. You've got your official kind of more DSM-5, academic explanation of it, and then you've got a slightly more practical application of what this means. So, according to the DSM-5, it's like a cluster of disorders, right? Whether that's ADHD, borderline personality disorder, bipolar, but it's classified as a disorder. Whereas the actual term itself really just refers to the fact that everybody's brains are wired completely differently. We think differently, we process information differently, and as a result, we react to it quite differently. So neurodivergence accounts for those differences, particularly when it comes to emotional regulation, impulsivity, and those neurological chemical key differences. And what can make it quite difficult is that a lot of symptoms overlap in between conditions. So it can be quite difficult to diagnose. I'm testament to that. But honestly, it's something that can really be harnessed into an incredible strength. Like you said, for employers, for students, for neurodivergence, if they can learn to lean into their neurodivergence rather than kicking against it and trying to make themselves something that they're not, we would probably have a lot more success as neurodivergents,
Sure. Well, there's a lot to unpack in that, but let's just go back to the misdiagnosis. What are the symptoms that you were that they could not discover what was the matter with you?
So I think one of the key things for me was that when it was after my last suicide attempt, my fourth suicide attempt, I was 18 and I was admitted into this mental health care institution. And I was done. I didn't want to stick around to see how things could work out. I just felt like if my life could go so awfully wrong, right when it was supposed to be beginning, right when I'd spent so much of my childhood working towards this career that I knew this was what I wanted to do, just to have it thrown up in my face right when I was supposed to really enter the field was quite difficult for me because I wanted to be in musical theater. And so I think a key thing here to note is that because I just had a suicide attempt, my levels of emotional dysregulation were quite haywire. They were all over the place. So that was the major symptom, I think, that my psychiatrist and psychologist picked up on, which was why they kind of leached onto the easy go-to diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and medicated me for it, which didn't help me, obviously, because it was completely the wrong medication. but there are all sorts of things like that. There's the emotional dysregulation side of it. There's impulsivity. There's a difficulty in concentrating and brain fog, and hugely, like, it's got a huge impact on your interpersonal relationships. But so does bipolar, so does borderline personality disorders, so does so many of these other neurodiverse conditions. And I think what I experienced is that the trouble with a lot of these more like mainstream mental health care institutions is that they are looking for what I noticed when I was there was that everyone amongst me and everybody around me seemed to have one of the same 3 diagnoses. And this can't be a one size fits all, like you fit into this category here. Because when you're talking about someone's mental health, you're talking about such a personal, unique experience, and you can't deal with it any other way.
Sure. So, first of all, this channel's about finding your feet after failure. So the first failure was with the medical professionals that misdiagnosed you. What advice can you give the medical profession in terms of how they can diagnose your kind of situation?
There's a lot of emphasis obviously put on training and on knowing your stuff. And I personally know, trying to get into the industry, that it's a hard one to get into because their requirements are quite high in that regard. But I think that there is a lack of emphasis for a lot of doctors, for a lot of mental health care professionals on the personal, on the, like, get to know this person as a person, aside from their diagnosis that you're trying to give them, before you try and give them that diagnosis. Because a lot of the time, I mean, one of the things that I found really interesting was I almost felt like I was rediscovering myself after I got my correct diagnosis. I felt like I was meeting myself for the first time, and I was suddenly discovering which parts of my behavior were me and my personality, and which parts of me were my condition, were things that I couldn't really help, and being honest with myself about that was so vital to being able to not use my neurodivergence as an excuse. I didn't want to be a victim to my neurodiversity. And with that mentality, there's no way I would have been able to harness it into the incredible strength that I utilize it as today. And that I think would be the major thing. And one would think in mental health care, it's obviously such a one-on-one kind of a thing, but there's definitely far too much emphasis. I can see where a lot of people kick against diagnoses and medication, because there's so much emphasis placed on it when there is a lot more behind talking to someone, discovering how they emotionally fluctuate, like figuring out their cognitive distortions and their thinking patterns, and it leads you to a much more accurate idea of what's actually going on.
Sure. So you're going to be a psychologist one day, so you're going to practice what you are preaching.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'm applying for honors now, so we'll see how that goes. But hopefully.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question in 2 parts. The first part is, what mistakes have you made on your journey pre-diagnosis, and then what mistakes have you made on your journey post-diagnosis?
I love that question. Okay. Pre-diagnosis. I think it's something I've dwelled on quite a lot, because there are a lot of things that I can look back on and go, that was a mistake, or that was a mistake. But the truth is, my emotional dysregulation that I was experiencing wasn't a mistake. It was something I was doing the best I knew how to deal with. I was dealing with the best way I knew how to at that point in time. And that doesn't mean I dealt with it correctly. And that doesn't mean that I didn't cause insane damage to my family in particular in that process. And I think the biggest mistake that I made was exactly what I'm here to talk about today, was trying to make myself something that I wasn't, trying to fit in with the system, trying to go along with when teachers would say, no, you have to study things in advance, otherwise you're not going to, do well in exams. And I bought into that. And And it was the strangest experience then in opposition, like leaning into my neurodiversity and discovering that everything could actually be so much easier than I had been making it. But that self-criticism was detrimental to me. And even long after my diagnosis, I was working on it in therapy. And to this day, I find myself in therapy sessions with my therapist saying, you know, just ease up on yourself. Let slide what you can afford to let slide. And don't give yourself a hard time about this. Or I'll tell her about something that's happened to me recently, and she'll go, but you realize that's a completely rational reaction. And I think because I've developed such an internal locus of control, if there's a problem, I immediately look inwards. And that's a pattern that I got into pre-diagnosis. And it's something I'm doing my best to break. And I think I'm doing a good job these days. Post-diagnosis, I think, I don't know about, I'm really not too sure. I think post-diagnosis, I've tried incredibly hard, especially initially, to create this with my own brand, to create a dynamic of this is who I am, this is easygoing, this is like go with the flow. So a lot of the time, I mean, I'll have business meetings, unless I'm recording. If I'm recording, I've got this whole setup. But if I'm not recording, I'll video call you like while I'm lying in my bed and I've just woken up. Like, I don't mind. And I think a lot of the time professionally, people would look at that and go, ooh, like, are you sure? But it's become an integral part of my brand to, like, I want people to come as they are, and I want to feel that I can come as I am. And I firmly believe in deformalizing every aspect of one's work as far as you possibly can, particularly as far as neurodivergents go. So I think that process has been a really interesting kind of learning curve. And like, but being on medication and having had the therapy and having these conscious thought processes in place to be aware of how I'm cognitively processing things has been so beneficial for me in terms of, like, I'll bump my head, but I don't have to bump my head 40 times now against the same brick wall to figure out how to get around it. And that has made things a lot easier for me in the long run.
So what major challenges have you had in this process?
Oh, I think the biggest one was shame. The biggest one was shame. Okay, so shame is the one I think that I've had to work through personally. This sensation of I can't be myself. I can't just openly have a meeting with someone and open up on the Zoom call and I'm lying in bed because no one's going to take me seriously. And you know what? There are some people who are like that, and I'm not sure that I want to work with them because it goes against my brand. So it's a good way of weeding people out, like early on, like the bad ones, if you will. But I think I grew up watching my parents in quite a conservative environment, you know, in quite a conservative setup. And that meant that I've grown up telling myself all the time, I should be this. Could have, should have, would have, right? I should have done this. No, but I should have said this instead. And ultimately, I can't change what's happened in the past. I can acknowledge and take accountability for it, but that's the most I can do. And learning to focus on what's within my control within that context has been quite difficult, particularly as it pertains to my relationship with my folks. I felt incredibly rejected by them quite early on in life already. My earliest memories as a toddler, like if I think back to the earliest memory I can recall, I'm sitting in the park near my parents' house, and my eyes were just brimming with tears. I was sitting by myself away from the playground where everyone else was playing, and I was just sitting there, and I felt so sad. And I couldn't put it into words. I must have been like, what, 4? I don't know. There's no way I could have cognitively processed that or put it into words or even recognize that that was abnormal, because all I had was my own frame of reference. And that was incredibly challenging for me. Feeling a sense of, I can't even be myself. I can't unmask, not being aware that it was masking, of course, but I can't unmask even around my parents or in my own home, meant that I ended up alienating and isolating myself quite a bit, which of course is like recipe to like going down the rabbit hole. And I think,
I say you certainly have unmasked yourself now.
I'm trying those, thank you. No, it's I know I get some funny looks sometimes. And I'm okay with that because I'm aware, I'm consciously aware of what's going on now. And I'm also consciously aware that like I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and I don't have to be, because I'm not the person who's going for the popularity contests, who's trying to, I'm trying to find my tribe, and I'm trying to find people who I can connect with and create a difference to. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, you've covered so much already, but let's just talk a little bit about your expression, success is built within us. Tell me about that.
I think we're programmed as human beings to search for happiness outside of ourselves. Like, no, I need to go and seek out happiness. I need to go and look for it. I need to go and explore, and I need to try different things, and and that's not entirely wrong, aside from the fact that, okay, here's the concept. I actually want to get a tattoo about it. It's a whole thing, but here's the concept. I firmly believe that we're made of the same stuff as the constellations, the same atoms that make up everything else that has ever existed in our world and how we know it. And so the way I like to think of it, reminding myself, first of all, that I'm made of the same stuff, which implies great capability, is important to me. And I think remembering that everyone and everything that has come before me, I can draw on those same strengths. I can draw on that strength because I'm made of the same stuff. I'm made of those same fibers, those same struggles, I think, that a lot of people before me have dealt with. And it's about creation, right? Ultimately, that's what makes us human beings, is our capacity to create something in this short little blink that we're actually there. And being able to value my creativity while still being or becoming super comfortable with my own insignificance has been eye-opening for me. And it takes the pressure off quite a bit, realizing that you don't have to be everything all at once. You don't have to be a successful brand. You don't have to put everything forward perfectly, because it's in the asymmetry of you that people identify, not the symmetry.
So you talk about your creativity and your brand. What is your brand?
My brand is Neurodiverse Generation with a J. I'm super proud of it. I've actually got my own podcast, first episode premiering this Sunday, which I'm like amped about, blood, sweat, and tears, but it's been worth it. And it's been so enlightening having these discussions with so many people about the different takes, on neurodiversity. But I essentially just aim to create a community of paper cut survivors living in a world made of paper. That's the aim.
Fabulous. So what advice or tips can you give firstly to ADHD sufferers?
My advice would be trust your brain. Trust your brain over what you're taught externally. But that comes hand in hand as a double-edged sword with absolute honesty with oneself. That means your deepest, darkest, things that you've buried deep in your consciousness that you would rather not pretend aren't there. You've got to deal with them. You've got to confront them, and you've got to say, this is the situation and this is what happened. And it bruises your ego. And I think being able to consciously lay out every single card on the table like that and say, this is what I've got, this is what I've done, this is what has worked for me, and this is what hasn't. allows you to experiment, and it gives you the freedom and the space to figure out what actually works for you. I mean, I can write books on all of the coping mechanisms and skills and tools that I've figured out for me, but the truth is they don't apply to every neurodivergent. I have to study for things like cramming, and I know that applies to a lot of people, but not to everyone. Some neurodivergents have to study in advance, otherwise there's no way they'll take the information in, because it is such a unique experience to each person. So I think honesty with oneself, coupled with trusting your brain and your body to guide you in the way that you function best, is optimal, because particularly as ADHDers, we're wired to find the quickest, easiest, like shortest solution to something. And so with that already in place, we've just got to capitalize on the way that our brains are naturally rolling to get momentum going. That's literally it. You're getting momentum going by working with your brain rather than against it. And that means you might have to do it in some atypical ways.
And what advice would you give to your support group?
Oh, wow. The biggest thing that I think we neurodivergents want their support structures to know is that we're not monsters. We're not crazy. We're not a lost cause. We're still worth it, you know, and we have a lot of value to offer if we're able to harness this correctly. But that is hugely dependent on our support structures, and our support structures not only being supportive, but being cognizant of our condition. So I often find myself, you know, my mom has become amazing with this, because I find myself, you know, I'll come in and I'll vent to her and I'll be super antsy and I'll be like, because I need to get the energy out somehow, you know, and I'm walking circles around the kitchen counter and I'm just venting and I'm going crazy. And then my mom tells me, no, I need you to do this, or I need you to focus on that. And I'm like, I can't now. I haven't waited in the ADHD queue for that. I haven't, like, I can't do that right now. And she's become incredible at just being tuned in and picking up on whether my state of energy is in like a high state of energy, like it's active and it's moving, or if it's a low state of energy, and kind of meeting me where I am. And that makes it all the more possible for me to open up and be communicative with her about what I'm experiencing. So that's been a big one. I think there's got to be a dynamic of trust within and respect within one's support structure, where it's a cycle that feeds itself, if that makes sense.
You said just now, oh, I can't deal with that now. Have you ever used your ADHD as an excuse not to do something?
I can't say I have, because I didn't know that I had it until recently. And since I discovered the diagnosis, it's been something that I rather use as a tool to explain to, like, my manager or my boss, like, listen, when you speak to me X way and X way, I can't absorb it. So I need you to break it down for me into smaller steps or something like that. So it's been used for me more since my correct diagnosis as a tool to educate people on how it, like, practically actually takes place, and to create a little bit more tolerance and understanding for myself personally. I think it's something I've been super aware of, using my ADHD as an excuse for something, because I felt incredibly victimized when I was misdiagnosed. I felt victimized. I felt like a victim to my condition, and I felt like I always was going to be, and I felt so trapped. I felt like my life was condemned, like I could never I could never go above and beyond what that label had given me. And I don't want to do that to myself. I felt like that was done to me, and I definitely, after the fact, didn't want to perpetuate it. So I don't think I have, not that I'm biased or anything, but yeah.
How did you overcome that victimhood?
I don't think I did. I don't think I did. I don't think I overcame the victimhood. I think that I experienced it and then I got a way out through a safer diagnosis, being ADHD. Because people don't listen to ADHD, like the diagnosis of ADHD, and they go, you know, oh, well, this person's crazy, they're emotionally unhinged. That they don't think that. They think, oh, you can't focus in class. And so it's a bit paradoxical, I know, because it's slightly, the dynamic is slightly more like, you know, I'm hiding behind the safety of people not completely understanding what ADHD actually means while fighting for a more conscious, tolerant environment. And that dissonance has been, it played on my mind quite a bit at the beginning when I was really building my brand up. I really do think I got the easy way out, because I don't think I really overcame that victimhood. I just had this huge relief that the hell that wasn't the case. And I think that sense of like I'm doomed just because I have this condition was partially what motivated me to create this dialogue, and to get people talking about it, because I don't think people should feel that way. I think, yeah, a diagnosis like that is only a label to others. You know what I
Interesting. Labels. We can have a whole new discussion on labels.
Yeah, for sure. We could talk for hours, though.
I interviewed your mom some time back, and I advise everyone who's interested to go and look. I'll put a link in the discussion below to that interview to see it from the parent, from the support group's perspective, because it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating to see and how the family copes with these kind of conditions.
Absolutely.
So, any final words for sufferers or support groups out there?
I think one of the biggest things is when you're, for both parties, when you're in the heat of it, when you're in the thick of it, you really can't see the forest for the trees. You can't. And you can't tell what's your kid and what's abnormal and what you've done wrong. And it's this push and pull, I think, for support structures between, do I assert, you know, these rules and like, do I hold firm here, or do I listen and show my humanity and allow vulnerability? And realistically, that humanity and that vulnerability has a lot more power to touch your kids, your students, your employees than that assertiveness ever will. I think that's a major one for support groups. And for neurodivergents themselves, don't isolate yourself. Don't alienate yourself from your family. And I understand that can be difficult in dynamics where your family might not necessarily be super supportive, even if you have gotten a diagnosis and you are getting treatment. There are a lot of families that don't believe in that. And I think one of your superpowers as a neurodivergent is empathy, and that capacity to put yourself in someone else's shoes and in someone else's space. So one of the things that I've learned to do is when I meet new people, particularly if it's a business endeavor, if it's a new friend, or if I try to meet them in the space that they're in. And that means I meet them in the worldview that they believe in, whether that agrees with mine or not. Because in doing so, I can create context without creating conflict. And that's been one of the most powerful tools I have for informing people about what neurodiversity really means. So join the fight.
The lessons that you've shared today don't only apply to neurodivergent people, it applies to anybody. I think there's so much about understanding yourself and going within to find that success rather than being that victim, because we all face some kind of victimhood somewhere in our lives, and we need to move on from that, and we need to find that success from within.
Absolutely.
So absolutely, I think you've got a great future ahead of you, sharing your experience. How can people find your podcast and how can people get in contact with you?
So you're welcome to reach out to me from my website. It's www.neurodiversegeneration.co.za. And
Then explain the J. Oh, for Jenna.
For Jenna, yeah, because it's the generation, like I think I named it that because we live in a society where a lot of people say, oh, ADHD wasn't a thing in my day, and no. So cool, we're the neurodiverse generation then. Realistically, it's always been around, but hell, let's ride this way.
That's very clever, very clever. And I will put that link, I will put all the links in the discussion below. But carry on, how else can they get you?
And so you can reach out to me from my website. I've got inquiry forms, and I've got a really, really special column that I do called Spectrum Support, somewhat like the Agony Aunts columns they used to do in 17 magazine, but for fellow crazies like me. So please write in, tell me your stories, and ask me questions, and share your story and what's happened with you, because I think talking about this and creating dialogue about it is the only way it becomes slightly more tolerable and a less taboo kind of social topic, rather than it being. And I also want to just say, there's a lot of emphasis today on, oh, we're so mental health positive and self-care day, and it's all completely superficial, and that real tolerance, I will know, has actually taken effect in life when people can see someone having a breakdown in the middle of a shopping center, and they'll come and ask, are you okay? Can I sit with you? What do you need? Instead of taking videos and posting them online. It's getting in tune with one's humanity, I think,
Fabulous. Oh, well, I wish you well in your journey forward, and good luck with your honors and your future. It's really exciting. And I advise you all to go and look out for Jenna's web and podcast. And please do subscribe to Finding Your Feet After Failure. And do go and look. There's a lot of information on the site about overcoming, getting unstuck, managing trauma on the channel. So please do go and look at the various videos that are available. Thank you, Jenna, so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Lois. I had an awesome time.
We could carry on